And a happy new year. I can't believe it's actually November since we last met, so lovely to see you all again. I'm looking forward to lots of robust discussion over the next couple of hours. I am conscious that many of you have travelled quite a long distance to get here, so I will endeavour to get through the meeting in the 2 hours allocated, but we've got a lot to discuss, so I'm expecting we might actually run over time. So first of all, have we got any apologies, Julie? I think we're a bit worried we wouldn't be quorate, but we are, which is good news.
So we have apologies from Councillor Lynn Williams, Councillor Brooks, Councillor Little, Councillor Owen, Councillor Tucker, Mayor Driscoll, Councillor Miller, Councillor Les, Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Waltham, Councillor Hannigan, Councillor Aspenden, Councillor de Gournay and Steve Curl.
Thank you. It must be a busy day in Councillor World today. Rather than go around the room and ask everyone to introduce themselves, when you do put your hand up to speak, can you just say who you are and where you're from? For those who don't know me, I'm Louise Gittins. I'm leader of Cheshire West and Chester Council and the interim chair of Transport for the North. So the second item, declarations of interest. Anybody got anything they'd like to declare? No, that's great. And the third item is minutes of the previous meeting held in November, 24th of November. So first of all, are they a correct record of the meeting that we held then? Has anybody got anything they want to add? Peter.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to add a point, really, which was that the LEPs spoke up about the IRP and supported the reservations that elected members had and also contributed to a unanimous vote. And I don't think it was really recorded in the minutes that the LEPs actually did that. So I would appreciate it if they could be amended just to reflect that.
Yes, I'm quite happy with that. I'm sure everybody else is. And you did speak up and you robustly supported our resolution. So yes, if we could have the minutes amended to show as such. Anything else in terms of the content of the minutes? So could I have someone to propose that they're an accurate record? Yes, okay, we've got a couple of people there. And seconded? Yes. I think Dan Jarvis and Darren Hale. Okay, thanks. Okay, so matters arising. Martin, I think there's a few things that we just need to follow up that aren't in the main content of the meeting, if you'd like to run through those.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, just to confirm to the board that the Decarbonization Strategy, which is the first of its kind in the country, the first of the regional decarbonisation strategy, was published before Christmas, and I have to say got a really good reception from the technical press and indeed wider. We also published the major roads report over the period of Christmas, and that again has received good response. Is to advise the board. We talked at the previous meeting about the fact that we had submitted a bid for some additional in-year funding. We've had a letter from the department confirming that we've received £336,000 of additional in-year funding, and we will be working through the allocation of that as part of the business planning process. And the final point, Chair, was just to say you did talk about the General Purposes Committee at the last meeting, and the first meeting of the General Purposes Committee is in the process of being organised and will be held shortly.
Thank you, Martin. I did note, I think it was Councillor Brown raised about those authorities that were putting in to become the headquarters of GBR, Great British Railways. Have we had any feedback from that? No? Okay. Well, good luck anyhow. Continuing good luck on that one. Okay, so anybody got anything else, matters arising, that won't be covered during the meeting today? Thank you. If we can move on to the next item, which is item 4, TfN Appointments. There are two parts to this. I'm going to introduce the first part and open it up to discussion. So this is about for the board to consider and approve the recommendation of the member panel for the Chair of Transport for the North to approve the appointment secondly of the S151 officer. So if you remember in the last couple of meetings we've talked about the recruitment process for the new chair of Transport for the North, and there has been a number of interviews, shortlisted to 2 applicants. One applicant was identified. There's been member engagement and stakeholder engagement, and the recruitment panel met 2 weeks ago to agree that they would like to recommend to the board the appointment of Lord Patrick Mclaughlin as the new chair. Patrick comes with a wealth of experience, particularly around his historical involvement with Transport for the North. So I don't know if anybody would like to make any comments or observations before we go to the vote. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, Tracy. Nice to
Thank
see
you, and hello to everybody. Can I firstly thank the that from my recollection is slightly different, and I wonder if you'd be happy just to give us an additional note, a little bit with a little bit more detail on the steps going from 2 candidates down to 1 preferred candidate, and also the probationary objectives. If they could be shared with all the members, we all want to ensure that our new chair will be speaking on behalf of all of us and our collective positions. And of course, his first outing is the Transport Select Committee. I have no doubt he will be able to reflect the voice of the North and for all of us on this board. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, so you'd like the, can you just tell me whereabouts that is on the paper so that we can...
The item where one of the candidates dropped out, that's not reflected in the papers.
Okay, yeah, that needs to be in there, definitely. And I think in terms of the probationary objectives, I think one of the items we're asking for approval is that the vice chairs, with the support of the CEO, are going to approve those. But it's really clear that he is responsible to the board. I think we need to make that exceptionally clear that those objectives reflect everybody's wishes. So yes, okay.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Good stuff. Anybody want to make any other comments? Darren? Councillor Hale?
Thanks, Louise. It's Darren from representative for TfN from Hull. It's very loud, isn't it? Sorry. I wonder, in the light of what Tracy's just said, whether or not, if we're going to go into that additional level of detail, possibly we should put that we shortlisted X candidates from a field of Y as well, because I think it was a significant whittled down. So I think it probably for a future record, it wouldn't hurt if that was in there as well. If that's okay, Martin? Louise?
I think that's a good point, because and it also shares that a lot of people were interested in the role and see the strength and the importance of Transport for the North. So yes, it was a long process that we had to go through to get to where we are today. Andy, and then Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to echo what Tracy said in thanking you and all the members of the panel and Martin and his team for conducting the process. You know, it's obviously been a challenging process in some ways, but it's been done well. It's engaged members of the board, and I think we're all grateful to you for overseeing that. I just thought I would share my experience of dealing with Patrick as a Member of Parliament for 16 years. I got to know him well in that period of time. He's a straight talker and somebody who's very much heart is in, if you like, the regions of this country, and understands the need to bring investment to the Midlands and the North. I think it's fair to put the Midlands in that as well, as he's a former Midlands MP. But I suppose I very much welcome his appointment. I think, as Tracy said, he is the right person to lead us into what is now a critical time, absolutely critical for transport in the North. I think having all of us on this board been through a sort of challenging time, I think we need just to reflect today on the fact that a former Transport Secretary, and a very distinguished one at that, has decided to join this organisation at this particular moment in time. And I think that says something about the importance of the Northern voice and the importance of Transport for the North as we go forward from here. I think, you know, we've taken a few knocks as an organisation, but I think the fact that he has stepped forward and put himself forward, I think should reflect the fact that what we are doing on this board is tremendously important to to the future of this country and the rebalancing of this country. And I think his appointment today, if agreed by this board, reflects that, and I think reflects on the importance of the strength of transport for the North going forward. So I just wanted to share that, Chair. I think this is, in my view, this is the right appointment at the right time. It is critically important, obviously, that our new chair, if approved today, speaks for this board. But I think we've got to make it easy for him in being as one as we were last time, as Peter rightly reminded us, not just political leaders, business leaders as well, in terms of what we felt about the IRP. If we can carry on working that way with a strong chair that is well respected in Westminster and Whitehall, then I think we're taking an important step forward today if we agree as appointment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say it was a pleasure to be part of the interview panel. It's worth highlighting it was a really competitive process, and I think also, just to say, we did have a really strong field of candidates, and I was really pleased by that also. So I agree with Andy and others. It's the right appointment, feels like the right appointment at the right time, and I look forward to welcoming Patrick, subject to the board's approval.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Yes, Kate.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Maybe Andy, you might expect me to agree with you on everything, but party politics should come into something like this anyway. And I think it's only right that you've had the experience of working with Lord Mclaughlin. So I believe that it's an asset to this board, to encourage this development, and we're pleased that he is going to be part of it. And I'm sure that it's going to benefit this board and the wider communities in whom we represent, in the way forward. And I think it's an asset to this board that he's going to be with us. So fully welcome it and hope that we're going to get to meet him shortly.
Thank you, Councillor Swinburne. As well as the probationary objectives, we'll need to, can I bring you in a minute, Charlie? Okay. We will need to agree some objectives and an induction programme. And I think you all saw the letter that came in last week from the Secretary of State welcoming an early meeting. And that's something that Martin and I will be picking up with Patrick and having that meeting with Patrick. Because obviously he does need that induction programme to find out and refresh and all of that. So we will be supporting him as we go forward over the next few weeks and months. Charlie.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to obviously echo the comments that have been made in support of this appointment. I think we are at a crossroads as an organisation, and I think we've made the right direction and we made the right decision here. I just want to put on record as well, the board, I hope we all thank the work that you've done as our interim chair. I think you've really stepped up to the role. As a very new member of this organisation, you made me feel very welcome into it. So I just want to say thank you very much for the work that you've done as our interim chair at a really, really troubling time. So well done.
Bless you. Thank you. That's very nice. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And if I can just reiterate the comments made from the other members of the appointment panel, and thank you for guiding us through the process. It was an interesting process, and I'm very pleased to hear that the rest of the board are agreeing with the recommendations. I think it is an excellent appointment, and I'm sure that he will be a great asset, as Mayor Burnham has said. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Move on. So there's a number of recommendations under this section. We just have a look at them. They're at 2.1. So first of all, approving the appointment of Lord Mclaughlin, the appointments panel's recommended candidate as the chair of TfN Partnership Board from the 26th of January. And also noting that in approving this candidate, Lord Mclaughlin is by operation of the subnational transport body TfN Regulations 2018 co-opted to the TfN board. And number 3 is approve the appointment of Lord Mclaughlin, the appointment panel's recommended candidate as chair of TfN board from the 26th of January, so that's from tomorrow, and that we note the formal start date for the chair and support to be provided by TfN officers. And then finally for this part, approves that the vice chairs, well actually we'll come back to the vice chair bit. So in terms of those items 1 to 4, can I have a proposer for that? And Councillor Hale, seconder. Okay, Charlie second. Super. Could I have a show of hands? All those in favour? I'll vote on this one.
I think that's
Okay, that's clearly carried. Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome, Lord Mclaughlin, if you're watching this online. Next time you'll be sitting here. Thank you, everybody, for your support. I know the appointments panel really appreciated of that. Okay, so the second part of this item is about the appointment of Paul Kelly as the Interim Finance Director and S151 Officer. Martin, can you just take us through this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And it is just hopefully just a straightforward item. Unfortunately, we lose Ian Craven as our current Financial Director in the middle of March. I know that in the short time I've worked with Ian, I've grown to really value and appreciate the contribution. So I know that members of the board who've been working with him longer will likewise miss his contribution. So we wish him well when he does move on in the middle of March to his new role. We need to cover the role of the Section 151 officer and make an appointment to the Financial Director's role. Having had a conversation and gone through the job specification, looked at the role, it is clear that our current Deputy 151 officer, Paul Kelly. Paul, can I just ask you to stand up? I know some members will know you, but Paul is our current Deputy 151 officer. The recommendation before you, colleagues, is that Paul is appointed as an interim finance director from the 17th of March. That appointment to be for 6 months initially. That will give us continuity during the period when we're having to deal with some of the transition that we're having to go through at the moment, and therefore it gives us continuity and certainty. And just to reassure the board that we're in the process of backfilling the role. If you appoint Paul as the Section 151 officer, there will be backfilling to make sure we have the capability we need within that team. So the recommendation to you, Board Chair, is that Paul is appointed as the Interim Finance Director from the 17th of March.
Thanks very much, Martin. Can I put it on record as well? My thanks to Ian for the support he's given me as interim chair, and also all the work he does behind the scenes to keep TfN ticking over financially. So a big thank you, and I'm sure the rest of the board will support me in those thanks. Councillor Swinburne.
You beat me to it, Chair.
Oh, you can say it again.
I think it's only right that we should minute our thanks from the board for the sterling work that the 151 officer has done, and the reports that he's provided us with in the past. So my thanks as well, and I just hope that the board will reiterate those thanks via the minutes, if you don't mind.
So can I have a proposer for Paul's appointment? Hands, Councillor Mundy. Okay, and Councillor Swinburne seconds. All those in favour? Thank you, that's clearly carried. Thank you. So that's that part. So the next section is the integrated rail plan, and this is an update for members. There's a number of things that we need to discuss as part of this, but it's an update on progress with key issues relating to the integrated rail plan following the publication and when it was brought to the board meeting in November 2021. Where we had a long and very passionate discussion about our response to the rail plan. There's obviously a number of things that are coming up, and I want to hand over to Martin in a while, but I'm conscious that some of the evidence was published either last night or this morning, which was very timely considering we had a meeting today. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, Martin, but could you just give a few comments on this first? Thank you.
If I might, Chair, I'll leave it to Tim to make a few observations about the evidence base that was published earlier today. We've had a chance to have a little look at it, and we'll give some reflections on it back. If I might, I just wanted to start off by setting a bit of context for this item, Chair, because there are some areas of work which you asked us as a board to take forward around looking at the economic and environmental assessment, and that work is ongoing, and we'll bring it back to you at a future meeting. Likewise, there's some work that's underway around looking at how can we maybe secure some local contribution towards the cost of it, so we retain the board's ambition for the longer term. ambition as you set out in your preferred network, which is absolutely right. And again, we'll bring that back to you in due course. There's an initial meeting with the department to think about some of that conversation later this week. What I kind of wanted to touch on, and you've got before you a paper with a couple of additional recommendations, one of which refers to this paper. What I wanted to draw attention to the board is you will be talking about the submission to the Transport Select Committee, and we'll talk a little bit about the sponsor board in a moment. But there are certain inevitabilities that I need to manage at the moment on your behalf with TfN, because we know, notwithstanding the uncertainty around the core funding, we know that there's no more Transport Development Fund as of the start of the new financial year. That's because the functions and activities are being taken on by the department from the new start of the new financial year. That means that there are obligations and requirements that I need to protect the interests of those people involved in that work, including conversations around 2P. And so, Chair, the first of the additional recommendations which relates to this paper is just to set out and get confirmation that I'm using my authority under the Constitution to have those conversations to allow the orderly transition of those pieces of work which are moving across, and making sure that we protect the interests of the individuals involved. So that's the purpose of the additional recommendation. We will then come to the conversation about the sponsor board, and just to remind everybody, throughout this conversation, the department has been very clear that as a statutory subnational transport body, our roles and functions are not affected by the transition in relation to the NPR working arrangements. So, Chair, that's just what I wanted to do by way of introduction and scene setting. If I may, I would suggest we pass over to my colleague Tim Foster to talk about the Transport Select Committee submission, including a few reflections on the evidence base.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon, members. Can you hear me all right? I think there's an echo. Is that okay? I'm largely dealing with section 5 of the paper, which picks up the TfN submission to the Transport Select Committee inquiry into the Integrated Rail Plan. But just first on the technical annex, clearly it arrived late last night. The officers have been going through it this morning. And looking at the detail, we will give you a full assessment of it when we come back to board in March, along with the assessment that you've asked us to do, that Martin referred to earlier. But just initial impressions, it's actually quite light and possibly shorter than we might have expected, given the importance and the magnitude of the decisions that have been made. And much of the detail that we expected to see and some of what we will need to do to undertake our assessment is missing. So I think we'll probably need to go back to the department and just see what more technical detail they're able to share with us. I think that what is clear about it is, and the document largely confirms, is that the wider economic and social implications of the Integrated Rail Plan haven't been taken into account in the way, and that does contrast really with the way that the evidence within the Northern Powers Rail Programme has been developed in a very robust and transparent way, and indeed the decisions that this board have made in arriving at the TfN preferred network. So I think that much so far is evident. We have some questions and some concerns about some of the way that some of the evidence has been presented, but I think we need to look at that in more detail before we come back to you. So we'll be doing that as we go on with the TfN assessment at the same time. But I'm happy to pick up kind of questions from people as we go along. Just turning to the Transport Select Committee submission very briefly, then that really is the theme of the submission, which focuses really on the restating the case for connectivity, and goes back to the principles of Northern Powers Rail and HS2 providing that connectivity, and what that then drives in terms of a more integrated, more cohesive, more prosperous north. So we thought it was important to go back and restate why the board have got to where it's got to in terms of its work on Northern Powers Rail, emphasising that NPR has been designed as a network for both passengers and freight in a very holistic and coherent way. And really, I think just making the point throughout about the strength and robustness of the evidence base that that this board has been working with. I think alongside that, and we are intending to submit all the statutory advice that the board has provided to government, as well as all the work that went into advising the National Infrastructure Commission. Again, as much to make the point that the North's position on these issues has been very clear throughout. And finally, repeating the offer that the board made in its statutory advice to government to work constructively with government to reach a better outcome and bringing in the contributions, potentially the local contribution. So those are the kind of key themes, and hopefully the board have had the opportunity to review already. We've already had some very helpful comments, particularly from South Yorkshire, and we'll be including sort of strengthening the links to Sheffield and the references to Sheffield through that. But we now have a very narrow window to finalise this, so what we're looking for from the board today is approval in principle. There is still a narrow window if members would like to submit written comments through officers. We can accommodate that tomorrow, but we need to get a submission to the committee by Thursday. So, Chair, I'll hand back to you at that point.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that the team have been doing on this. It's really appreciated, and thank you to everyone who's contributed. And I suppose what we need to do now is just look at that submission and check and ensure that it's got all the really important points that we want in there. And I think it's disappointing to hear that the initial information we're getting from DFT in terms of the support for IRP is a little thin on the ground at the moment. And we've always been very clear and been very evidence driven in what we've been doing, making that economic and sustainable and inclusive case for investment in the north. So hopefully there's some other stuff that's hiding away in the background. So if I could bring some people in. So first of all, Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Chair. I think I don't want to go over old grounds, but you've sort of got to get the picture. I think we was tasked with trying to find out with the best possible transport links for the north without a budget, and basically said just work on what's needed for the north to make it work, which we did do. And then what we ended up with, the DFT coming up with a proposal of their own, based, I believe, based on the financial implications, and then they tried to put something together not based on evidence, and that's why I think we got short of evidence based now, but based on the budget they had to use. What I say again is, if we were given a budget at the start of it, right at the start, we would end up in a better situation than we have now. What we've ended up with is the DFT coming up with talking to the Treasury and coming back with what you can have with what they've got left for the north. And I still think we would have come up with a better deal had we knew exactly what we was having, what the budget was, and we worked on. And I think going on to the growth for the north and the levelling up side of things, we keep dropping the levelling up bit now, because obviously we're way behind and not likely to get anywhere near level with the proposal that's coming forward. So I think we need to carry on working with DFT, and need to make sure that our expertise doesn't get missed, and we start looking at to make the best we can out of the poor deal we've been given. That's what we have to do anyway. That's what we'll always do. Bear in mind that there's been a massive opportunity to actually change the prospects of the people in the north has been missed. Can't forget that it's been missed. It's been missed, and the opportunity what we've had been missed again. And I reiterate, is the opportunities for the growth of the north is missing. The details from the DFT plan is missing. The actual why they did things, why they've suggested what they have suggested, the detail backing that up isn't there. And I still believe it's because it's financially driven, not evidence-based driven. And we've got the evidence to back up every proposal we put forward has been evidence-based. And it's not just the routes that's been evidence-based, it's the potential growth. And actually saying, how can you get to economic growth in different parts of the country, particularly the north, where it's needed, to even get starting the first step on the ladder of levelling up. The ladder's been taken away from us. That some parts of the north have been taken away altogether. I think, I'm trying not to be so disheartened by it, but we will, and I say, dust ourselves down and start working with what's on the table and start making the best possible we can out of a poor deal, and never let the government off the hook there. They give us a poor deal, we in the North will do our best to make sure it works, the best we can for our people, because that's what our job is. But opportunities, I say, have been lost. I'm sorry for rambling on a little bit, but it has been, I think, some positive news for Warrington out of the new information. But overall for the North, I still think it's a poor deal.
Thank you, Councillor Mundy. So I've got a number of people wanting to speak. I've got Councillor Hale and then Mark and then Tracy, Liam and Dan.
Thank you, Louise. You sort of know what I'm going to say because I will say it at every meeting, don't I? But the discussions that I think we need to focus on with the select committees, when we talk about rail capacity, it has to also be seen not just in terms of sheer numbers on trains and the number of trains, but the effect that that will have on driving modal shift. And I think that we need to, in a sense, because government isn't necessarily that joined up in terms of the entire 2030 agenda and the carbon neutral agenda. Because to me, obviously, if you don't have that capacity, you don't drive modal shift, and therefore, effectively, people, particularly from our part of East Yorkshire and Hull, will still make journeys by car that they could make if there was that realistic alternative. And that's going to do nothing, as the Humber is the area of the country that produces the most carbon, is the most carbon polluting. The fight back against carbon needs to start in that area, really, because it's, you know, the biggest polluter needs to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I do hope in the select committee we do make that point about the linkage between rail capacity and decarbonisation, and that leads us on to the point, and I know Stuart made the same point as well, was that means that you've got to look at decarbonisation to the ports, both of Hull and Immingham as well, because you definitely can't have a decarbonised solution if you don't have electrification, and that's the point that I would continually make. And you know, hybrids are not the answer, we know that. Hybrid cars aren't the answer. We know that most people have a hybrid car, never ever charge them at home. You know, that's the reality. 5%, I think the stats show. And if you've got a hybrid train, the reality is, on large parts, it's an excuse not to electrify. It's a reason to just continually run it on fossil fuel. So I think that part about the linkage to the carbon reduction thing is absolutely crucial in the evidence we give to the select committee. And quite ironically, I was in a meeting with Michael Gove and some of the industrialists around the Humber and the other leaders last week, where they were talking about a cross-Humber business and local authority solution to help decarbonise that area, recognising it was a major part of the problem of the country. And to then not have this bit joined up would seem, it would seem a really missed opportunity. I suppose that's probably understating how I feel. But if we can make sure, I don't know, that is fully reflected in the submission. Basically, it affects us, but it affects the whole of the North, I think. And I do think, I mean, Tracy will probably come on to it. We did meet as the Yorkshire leaders last week, and I do think the Yorkshire leaders, Tracy, were going to have a separate submission where they're not done about this IRP as well. I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin's been scribbling notes there. You'll be pleased to know.
Okay, Mark Ralston, Lancashire Lep. I think, given where we are with this process, I think it's even more important that we take this opportunity to perhaps reset our general approach and how we deal and respond with Westminster and Whitehall. And I think it's even more important that we have greater clarity of messaging in what we do. So I know it's sort of slightly housekeeping it, but the response to the select committee, you know, is full of absolutely wonderful stuff, but it's quite difficult if you are reading it to pull out what those salient points are. So I would like to see that we have, in everything that we do in terms of outputs from this group, that we have executive summaries of our absolutely key messages that go to Westminster and government, and everything that is outputted from here, that we have absolute clarity of message so that there can be no dispute as to what this group of people stands for, and that we continue to reference the fact that it is not just a political organisation. It is cross-business, it's cross-political, it's cross-boundary, so that it has added weight. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and I think that's a really important point to raise, and Peter and I were sort of discussing this at the beginning. It's almost going back to basics and being really clear about what it's all about. Because then I was saying when I first joined here, it took a while for me to understand it, and actually we need to speak as if we're, this sounds quite rude, but as if we're speaking to Martians, so that actually these are our key objectives, and just making it really clear. I'd wholeheartedly support that.
But continue to reiterate it in everything we do, so that we don't just do it once, we do it all the time.
Yeah, it's repeat, isn't it?
And it might stick then.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. And if I could just open with saying that devolution in West Yorkshire gave us a really brilliant opportunity that some of the mayors around this table will already feel and understand, to be ambitious. So we want to identify 36,000 jobs, economic growth of 3.7 billion, but we're a region where only 71% of the population have a car, the lowest number in England. The average is 74%. So we need a 5-star gold-plated transport network system. So it was incredibly disappointing that of the £96 billion worth of IRP funding, we get 7 billion, and 6 billion of that is already identified for TransPennine upgrade, which we've been promised for a decade. So basically, we're getting £1 billion, and that is for electrification between Bradford and Leeds, and then a survey of how to get fast trains from Sheffield to Leeds. So obviously, you can feel my disappointment. So in our submission to the Transport Select Committee, we did ask for evidence of where the government are making these decisions, because it doesn't chime with where we see our opportunity for our region. And anybody cynical around this table might think the timing of this report last night was, potentially because they've got something to hide, but obviously they've got nothing to hide because it's not as detailed as we would hope. But it does feel, from first reading of the information that we just got last night, that there is no focus. It's all about the cost. There's no focus on opportunity for growth and the impact that these networks are going to have on our community. And if levelling up is to mean anything at all, it is about access to opportunity, it's about health, it's about jobs, all of those things that we all know around this table that are going to impact massively. Also, there is no identification of timetabling at all. So are these fast speeds going to be, do they mean that then we're not going to get stopping trains? Because that is the impact for Dewsbury, the impact for Morley. We can't have 12 minutes between Leeds and Bradford and it stopped nowhere. We've got that connectivity between not just Bradford and Leeds, but across the region. So I would ask, is it possible for TfN to submit a late paper to the Select Committee that underscores and questions, and I'm sure you will get support from around the table, this late paper, because I think it's really important that we get an opportunity to put that to the Select Committee, and I will have the opportunity to give evidence in person, and I'll be raising it. So it would be great to have the backing and the rigour with which you've always shown your data gathering and conclusions, to be able to have that to refer to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I can see Martin nodding there, and I'd support that. A phrase comes to mind: the cost of everything and the value of nothing, and it's that long-term value of things.
Said it, Chair.
Thanks. Okay, so yes, we've got agreement. We can do that. That's good. So Liam.
Yeah, thanks very much, and I'm probably going to end up agreeing with the vast majority of what everyone's said so far. Other than I don't think we should be saying we're going to make the best of a bad deal. I think we should point out this is an extremely bad deal, and the North won't accept it, and actually government has to think again around this, because Tim's been really polite, but dead damning in what he's just said about how evidence that came out late last night is very light. This is meant to be economic data that underpins infrastructure decisions that will shape the North's economy and thus the UK's economy over the next century, and it's based on stuff that politely is light, and fully support sort of Tracy's suggestion about how we need to point that out in a a late paper, because one of our great frustrations, and we'll be feeding back to Tim some Liverpool specific points, is in the response we've had from the Secretary of State, where he talks about doubled capacity on the Manchester to Liverpool corridor. We don't believe that's factually correct. If you actually tell people in Runcorn, in St Helens, in Newton Le Willows, that they will be losing services, and they will, and the fact, Louise, that we won't be able to increase services into your patch and into Wales, north and south from Liverpool, that is not doubled capacity on our corridor. That's frankly levelling down, and that's completely and utterly unacceptable. So I think from our perspective, those are the points we should be feeding back, that this is based on evidence that doesn't hold weight. Does the additional evidence exist? Because if it does, we need to see that. Or being a bit cynical, does it not exist in a form which would justify the decisions that have come forward? So we really need to kind of push that back very, very hard, that the north of England should not accept what is being proposed, because quite frankly, it's a bad deal for the 15 million people that we represent.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Dan?
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I completely agree with the sentiments and concerns that others have expressed, and I think Liam's just expressed it very clearly on behalf, certainly of me, and I know a number of other colleagues as well. That's why I really do welcome the scrutiny that the Transport Select Committee will put on the Integrated Rail Plan in the investigation that they're going to conduct. And I think it's a really good opportunity for our new chair to announce his arrival nationally in front of the Transport Select Committee and press the case that's just been outlined by Liam and others. I agreed with what Andy said earlier on about Patrick being a good signing for us. He's a big hitter politically, and he's going to be paid a significant amount of money. And I think it's our collective responsibility as a board, and I'm sure that we'll step up to the plate on this, to make sure that he earns that money. And I think that involves him getting out there and expressing the concerns that this board have expressed to ministers and to other stakeholders as well. I think that sits alongside a really important mission for us collectively as an organisation, because given the frustration that I think collectively we feel, we can get angry about it, and that's all fine. But actually the best thing to do about it is get organised and work out what it is we're actually going to do about it. And I think an increase in the communications and engagement activity with stakeholders right across the north of England and with partners in Whitehall is a really important part of this. We've got to tell the story. We've got to articulate the concerns that collectively we have. And I think it's very important that we energise ourselves, get organised and think about how we're going to do that, and use Patrick wisely as our figurehead. Turning to the detail of the submission, I was reassured to hear Tim say that he's taken on board some of the points that we've expressed in writing. I think it is a really good piece of work, and actually with a couple of sort of relatively minor tweaks, I think it could be significantly improved. We've fed some thoughts in around the graphics and around some of the statistics and how we think that those could be tweaked slightly to improve the impact of it. And I think, Tim, you do understand the sort of the concerns that we've had about Sheffield and the kind of sort of lack of focus on South Yorkshire and Sheffield, and we'd be very grateful if that could be reflected in the submission that goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Andy?
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with what everyone else has said, and I'm just thinking about how we get our intervention here absolutely right, given a select committee is a particular process. Some years since I was on the health select committee, but I do have that experience of what they can do and where they can add something to the debate. So I think there are two things that I would just want to sort of say that I agree with the thrust of what's being proposed, by the way. I absolutely agree with Liam that we should be saying wrong solution, and we need a root and branch review of this, not just a tweaking of the IRP. But I would want to go at this in two ways. Firstly, encouraging the select committee to unpick what has been put forward overnight and into this morning, which is threadbare, as Liam is saying. And I think Tracy's suggestion is a good one. I would incorporate it rather than in a subsequent letter into our main submission to the select committee, because this assertion that the value for money is worse, I would say, on what basis has that been calculated? If it's purely on railway capacity and connectivity, then I'm afraid that is way too narrow, and it goes back to the debates that we had at this board about the Green Book has never looked after the north of England. So the way UK government has assessed infrastructure investment has never served us well, hence the huge divide north to south. And actually, what we were told when Levelling Up came around was we were going to have a different way of looking at these things, capturing the social benefit. The specific things I would ask the Select Committee to look at would be, for instance, has the level of disruption between Manchester and Leeds, which we're told is 15 years, I think I'm right in saying, of disruption on the main line, that will impact on our economy. Has that been taken into account in the value for money consideration that the department has carried out? Has, for instance, the closure of our Metrolink line out to Tameside been considered in the value for money? Has the impact on freight been considered? Well, I think it hasn't, because it says in the assessment that it hasn't. But surely one of the major arguments for NPR is you open up freight opportunities on, through to Hull from Liverpool. I mean, that's one of the things that this board has identified repeatedly. Surely there is a value for money case to be made about more freight moving across the north on rail. There's a productivity gain to be had there, surely, with less time of the M62 just rammed with everything. There must be a bigger value for money test here. Bradford, what is the value for money for linking a city of that size to modern high-speed rail? There must be an uplift to the economy in Bradford. There must be a win for UK PLC in having Bradford connected in that way. There must be an uplift in land values. And it must surely, to goodness. And so I would say, give the Select Committee something they can go at, which is, in my judgment, unpicking this value for money assessment, this threadbare assessment that's been put forward in this, because I don't think it will stand up. And I think the value for money case for this board's preferred option is much stronger than is being suggested here because of the uplift. It's not just to Bradford or Leeds, it's to Manchester Airport as well, because obviously if we're connected in that way, there's a value uplift right along at the line. And then this takes me to the second point that is mentioned, but I think we should look at in a little more depth if we can. And it's this thing of local contribution, because again, the Select Committee probably won't just rehearse the headline political arguments. It will want to say, well, what is the new thing that we can look at here? So alongside a fuller value for money test, I think play in this idea of local contribution. In fact, it's already played in, because the government's already started it, because as I've said before at this board, we are the only part in England, Greater Manchester, that is being asked to contribute to the cost of the IRP with respect to an airport station at Manchester Airport. Now, the reason why this issue is now very much on the table is because the IRP has in many ways destroyed the business case for us making a financial contribution at Manchester Airport. Why? Because we don't have connectivity with Bradford, we don't have connectivity with Leeds. As we know, because of Dan's raised it at this board before, we're losing connectivity anyway in the timetable. So the case for us investing there, the contribution, were we to be able to find one, well, it's made it harder for us because of the IRP. So either take that local contribution away and don't ask us to make it, or go with the idea of local contribution and give us that land value capture mechanism to get the value from Bradford that would come if you were to uplift the city in the way that we describe, and in Manchester and in Leeds, capture the value of what you're creating here and let that pay for the difference between the IRP's option and this board's preferred option. So I would just say that, actually, I agree with the broad thrust of what's being proposed here, but open up very productive lines of inquiry where the Select Committee, if it was to delve, can actually really unpack something for us. And I would say it's in that value for money kind of case that isn't there that will quickly fall under the scrutiny, I think, of a much more substantial value for money test. And then it's secondly, kind of opening up the positive proposal of land value capture as a possible way of bridging the gap between the government's option and our preferred option. And I think that's where a Select Committee can really kind of run into that space and I think help this board in taking its arguments further forward.
Thank you, Andy. And I think you've got a little phrase for us to use there, value for money, which I think comes out very powerfully. So yeah, I agree with all of that. And Martin, again, was writing notes and nodding furiously. Can Councillor Smith, did you want to come in first?
Please,
Thanks.
Chair. Thank you. Excuse me. I agree with everything that's been said as well. The only thing I would say in terms of, for example, HS2, and I'm sure Councillor Swinburne may be of a similar view. If not, please correct me. When you mention HS2 to the people of Lincolnshire and North East Lincolnshire, it's by and large irrelevant to us. What we actually want in Lincolnshire is actually not a Victorian infrastructure of one line that way, and we need more stock, as in not stock that's southern stock left over that's about 30 years old. Reading through the documentation, and I appreciate I'm the new boy, if you like, but reading through the documentation, it touches very loosely on an upgrade to the East Mainline. It doesn't give any detail what this upgrade, in inverted commas, is. But going back to Mayor Burnham's point on Manchester Airport as well, this is relevant. A couple of years ago, you used to, directly from Barnaby, be able to get straight to Manchester Airport. You now can't. You now have to change at Manchester Piccadilly to then go from Manchester Airport. Why this was done, I don't know, because to me that seems absolutely ludicrous. It was one of the best, certainly probably from a Lincolnshire perspective, probably one of the best connections that we had to an airport if you wanted to go by train. Without driving, because the nearest is East Midlands Airport, but the rail connections simply aren't there. So Manchester was ideal. If you didn't drive and you needed a lift, you could go via there. But you now have to change, and whether that's reduced connections, I don't know. But the biggest thing Lincolnshire needs is actually we need huge investment in railways that were closed in the Beeching report donkeys years ago, which, as we all know, should never have happened. Those lines shouldn't have been closed because, as a result, trains they're not being as used in a manner that they should be. You go through the report, the North's use of trains has bounced back faster than the South, a lot faster. So as Mayor Burnham said, where is this value for, how have they calculated value for money? The South has already got huge, vast swathes of infrastructure, far more in advance than we have. So surely, yes, it may cost you more to invest, but the value, not just the economic value that you're going to unleash by allowing more freight, more passengers, more everything, is going to be, but the socio-economic value is going to be 3-4 times what you'd actually get from investing, say, further south. And I really, really would love to see how it's scrutinised and how it's been calculated, because there isn't any definition of how they've calculated value for money. There isn't any major detail on any upgrades into the East Coast Main Line, in terms of, certainly from a Lincolnshire perspective. I mean, the amount of residents I speak to and say, well, if that's our main, that's the main Barnaby is, the main East Coast line, and this is our service. It's pathetic. It's supposed to be the main East Coast line, and it's something out of the Victorian era. It really is. So I really think, as a board, we need to be, as well as shouting for the connectivity from Bradford, Liverpool, and other areas, we need to be hugely levelling up Lincolnshire, because we are supposedly the breadbasket of the nation, yet we can't travel realistically by rail in the numbers we should be able to, because we're hamstrung by Victorian infrastructure that's not been invested for properly over a number of years, and that needs to change.
Thank you for that submission. I've got Justin, then Councillor Swinburne and Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I've not seen this scanned evidence yet. So if there are calculations or evidence in there that relates to the opportunity from business, I'd obviously be interested. But if not, I think that's an area for us to look. I think generally businesses live with transport, whether that's for our people or whether that's for goods. It is what it is, and it's almost a barrier that you put up with and you work around it in whatever way it is. But I do think there's considerable opportunities, and I'd kind of highlight them in a number of areas. I would say the first one is productivity. For us, being able to move people around effectively is of course important, but where is it that our economic value add comes from? Or whether it's innovation, being able to bring the right people from the right places at the right times. as we try to recruit, skills cuts across all of this. People want to live where they want to live, and we need to be able to move them around. We don't get to make choices so often about where our businesses are located. It's not immovable, but it's less movable. So I would then add to that decarbonisation. As we, as big companies probably first, but it will come and go through the economy, it becomes quite difficult. And it's a bit tragic when you look out the window and the car park's full of cars. But actually you sit around and you say, well, why is this? And everybody's story says, oh my goodness, well, it takes half the time, or, this is difficult, or, oh, well, more often than not I'm delayed, and so on. So I think actually, given the magnitude of business, when you start to add it all together, I think there's some specifics, and I don't know what sort of evidence we've got that points to that. When you add together lots of little bits, it becomes a very big number. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councillor Swinburne.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to have to be really careful here, because it's going to be awful for me if I keep agreeing with what Andy's saying. But it is, Andy does make a lot of sense, and I appreciate him for his input into these sort of things. And when he mentions about the infrastructure, and when she mentions about value for money, and when we talk about the freight side of things, the freight side of thing in this report is not highlighted enough as far as I'm concerned. Because, and I keep mentioning it every board meeting that I come to, where I stand on North East Lincolnshire, and about how Immingham, and the port of Immingham, and we talk about with Darren about Hull. Immingham still holds the record, and will continue to hold the record for import and export of goods. And it's a big thing for us, but we've got to make sure that that infrastructure is in place to accommodate that. We've also got the Freeport status now, which is going to be a big advantage to us. We've got to get the message across about value for money and what we're doing with it. And the reply that we got from the Secretary of State is terrible as far as I'm concerned. I don't think it portrays, just what we're talking about. And is this board being listened to? And if we're not, what on earth are we doing here? If we're not getting our point across and nobody's listening to them, and they're coming up with their own views. As Mark says there as well, the government have got to be realising, that we're here for a reason. And we're here to represent people, and our thoughts have got to be portrayed across that way. So I would hope, that in the report we can go back and say that, the things that are missing out of that report need putting in and need highlighting for the benefit of this board and the people that we represent. And I agree with what Councillor Smith has been saying there, and I appreciate what he says about, North East and Lincolnshire and the disadvantages that we've got around that area. I've mentioned time and time again about the direct rail link that's needed between Cleethorpes and London. We've been promised it and promised it and promised it. Now we're told that it's not going to be on the timetable until 2023. And I've written personal letters to the Minister about this, and it's similar to the report that you got here. They're not bothered. They just fob you off really with what they think is best. We know what's best as this board, and that's why we should be portraying that across in the reports that we have.
Thank you for that. Charlie.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start by just formally reiterating what I said at the last board in terms of our response to the IRP from Lancashire has got to focus on the freight, east to west connectivity, and also the smaller services, the inter-town, the connecting community services. So just very briefly on each one, the freight side of things, it was kind of nodded at within the union connectivity review. I've got to make sure that the IRP and the UCR talk to each other, and I'd really like to make sure that's included in our response to the IRP. Secondly, in terms of east to west connectivity, there is a potential fourth east to west route, which is if we had the glorious Skipton to Colne link through Lancashire. There is something that I'd like to introduce to colleagues today, which is that Lancashire have started our process for a devolution deal. The County Council voted yesterday, and we've got all the 2 unitaries and 12 districts have all agreed on it. 10 Labour leaders, 5 Conservative leaders, we've all agreed on it, which is unbelievable. No, not the M word, but we're getting there. But what we are aiming to do is to actually put forward our own strategic transport plan for Lancashire and try and get, you know, our fair share for Lancashire. So any opportunities that our friends and neighbours and colleagues can extol the virtues for Lancashire will be always appreciated and always reciprocated. But east to west connectivity, I think, that's again one of the key things that I want the select committee's response to include. And then the third one is obviously that intertown, the smaller services. We're obviously talking about the connections between the big cities, and obviously there is only one service between big cities that I'd like to see, and that is obviously a link between Morecambe and Manchester, the two biggest cities of the north. But if we Morecambe's a city in waiting. But yeah, so I think focusing again on those, how do we interact the IRP with the other conversations about rail investment, restoring your railways has been alluded to by some others. I think that's really important. My final point I'd like to make is about a more technical issue, which is I was expecting a little more meat on the bone by now about what that co-sponsor role looks like. I think that the work that has been done in the papers today, I think is important. Do we have any examples of what a co-sponsor looks like elsewhere in the country, or indeed international examples? I think it would be useful to know. What are we expected as the co-sponsor? And I think it'd be quite useful if we don't have that fleshed out yet. I think we should just really give it to them totally straight in our response and just say, right, this is what we will do for you. This is the value we're going to add to you, and be able to write our own job description effectively. That's something that I'd like to see is part of the response.
Thank you, Charlie. And I think I'm going to bring Martin in when we've had this discussion to talk about that co-sponsorship role and initial thinking. I mean, it's interesting what you said about linking it up to, for example, Union Connectivity Review. I was in a meeting with Baroness de Vere last week with the rest of North Wales, and freight was really important to her. So freight was high on the agenda, not just a nod. It was, I really want to find out how we can get freight onto the railways. So Councillor Hale talked about joining up dots. I think there needs to be a bit of joining up dots in government, to be frank. So I think we need to keep pushing that case against freight, because over here they're talking about it. So, or whichever way Wales is from there. So, yeah. Thanks for your point. Anybody else want to contribute to this part, the IRP submission, before we move on to the co-sponsorship? No? Well, thank you all. That was, again, once more, a really robust and passionate debate. Martin, do you just want to sum up the points that we've got from that before we move on?
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you to all members of the board, because I think what you've helped is actually strengthen how we make this presentation, as Mayor Burnham said, actually in front of the committee. And I think there's a lot of material there that we can build into the presentation, working with the interim chair and the new chair as we prepare for that. I think the key things for me, I want to really emphasise, I think when we're there, we're evidence-based. We're ambitious, but we're evidence-based. We understand what it is that we're trying to do, and with the technical skills that we've got as TfN allow us to do that. I think there's a good point being made by a number of members about how we demonstrate our approach to appraisal, which is much broader than just the old Green Book, and actually trying to make real that new, broader agenda around the social, the environmental, as well as the economic. And I think we've got some really powerful messages there to show how we can make that real. I'm really keen that we make the point to the committee, and you've got it on papers later in the rest of the agenda. It's very easy when you see these headline figures about how rail is doing at the moment, and it's sort of 60%, 60%. Come to the north. Yeah. You know, our operators are reporting nearly 100% revenues prior to the Omicron variant. So our rail demand is back in terms of passengers. And if you look at the demand on freight, it's already back to and beyond what we had looking for. If you're following where's the need to make the investment, we've got the evidence that we're ahead of what the rail need is in the north compared with perhaps what's happening elsewhere. So I think we can make that point with the evidence really strongly, and you'll touch about it. I think there is something in this point about mixed traffic. Anybody who drives, if you drive on a motorway and you see a couple of lanes of HGVs alongside cars, you see the difficulty of having freight alongside local traffic, alongside longer distance traffic. And with an essentially Victorian railway network, we're going to have that challenge as we move forward. So, as the board has rightly said consistently, this is not just about speed, it is about capacity, a step-changing capacity to deliver the step-changing growth that we need. And I think really we want to emphasise before the board, before the committee, that those challenges we know, like for example Leeds being in the top 3 locations in the entire country for delays to rail services, will still be a challenge. We know that we've got the challenge between Sheffield and Leeds. We actually know that the reason why the Leamside line is promoted isn't about just unlocking growth along it. It's about providing the paths on the East Coast main line to deal with some of the challenges there. So I think those are all points we can draw out from the evidence and amplify in the submission to the Civic Committee. And we will pick up, as I think Mayor Burnham suggested, some of our initial observations about the evidence base, so that's there in the submission, but we can amplify that in a week's time when we're there before the committee. So,
can I just stress that point about the value for money in the building of the different options? Because I think both on the Liverpool side and on Tracy's side, this one option is much more disruptive, as I understand it, than the other. And it's critical that that is factored in terms of the value for money test, because it could severely damage our economy in the building. And I just want to just not miss that point, because I think it's critically important.
I think, Chair, that's a really strong point, because we know we've spent the time with the NPR team that's been co-clienting this to look at that, how we deliver this. So it isn't about just an aspiration; it's about it's about the delivery of it. So if I may, Chair, we'll take those points on board. We'll tweak a little bit of the submission, and then we'll amplify that when we're in front of the committee in a week's time. If I may then, Chair, just go on to the co-sponsor role. You've got in the paper, in the section, sort of building on what Councillor Edwards was saying, some of the ideas about what we think that should look like. And I think in the conversations that we've had with the department officials, I've been really keen to emphasise we've got a good example of how this works already, because we have the Rail North Partnership. We have a Rail North Partnership where TfN and the department work together. Obviously, the department is the fund holder, so not unlike the IRP, the funding comes from one source, but we work really well together and deal with some quite challenging issues. But the North's priorities get taken into the Rail North Partnership and actually reflected within the planning for services as we move forward. So I think I would encourage the board to think that there's a model there that we can actually build upon of trusted working together. And use that perhaps as a model that we work with the department. I have to say that in the conversations we're having with the department, they are listening to our suggestions, and we've put forward some ideas. It's something where we will need to bring back a definitive proposal for you as a board to consider, and in fairness, officials will have to put something to ministers as well for their approval, because it is a joint board. But I think if you were asking me, Councillor Edwards, do I feel we're moving in a good direction? I think we're moving in the right direction. I think there's something there that we can work with. I've been really clear to the officials that the message from this board is you may not be happy, you'd be very concerned about the content of the IRP, but you want to make that sponsor board role work. You want to be a strong, powerful voice working alongside the department to make sure that what is taken forward reflects the North's proposals. I think we can build on that, and we would look to bring something back to you as a board or at the consultation call we've got scheduled for February.
Thank you, Martin. So the details are in Appendix 3 and at Section 6. In particular, there's a number of principles there as well. So has anybody got any comments? Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the IRP, transport being a facilitator of inclusive, sustainable growth, and our plans embed the principle that we should give everyone in the North access to opportunity because it unlocks productivity and so on. I think the sponsorship role probably is a bit wider than Rail North in that respect, and the business voice in achieving our LEP strategic economic plans for the North should be heard. So I would just like to ask Martin as chief executive, just to work out how that voice can be fed in, because it's going to be a very small board, that sponsorship board, and that there won't be space perhaps directly for a business voice, but I just think we need to look very carefully now at how we can feed that in.
I think Martin's going to respond. I think it sounds like a good idea, but I don't.
I think, Chair, what I'm suggesting is, and I would look to, maybe that's one of the first things the General Purposes Committee can actually help us with, because in my mind, we need to have, if we do stick with the Rail North Partnership model, we have the Rail North Committee chaired by Councillor Robinson as acting as the political sounding board and the sounding board that we can work with, and then that feeds into the actual conversation at official level through the Rail North Partnership. I think there's something there about how do we get a representative view from this board that can then feed into those people representing this board on the sponsorship board. So I think that is something we need to work with. I suggest that's maybe one of the first things we ask the General Purposes Committee to help us with as part of the moving forward.
Thank you, that sounds a great way forward.
Any other comments on this role? So, if we go to the recommendations at the start of the paper, and we've got an extra one, which is on your piece of paper that was handed out. So there are now 4 recommendations. Is everybody happy with those? Yes? Quick show of hands? Yeah. Okay, that's clearly carried. So lots of work there over the next few days. Well, it's tomorrow the submission is, isn't it? Thursday. Okay, thanks, Tim. Okay, so the next item is the budget and business planning report. I think, Ian, you're going to start with this, and then we'll bring Martin in afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the kind words earlier. I just wish I had something a bit more positive to present to everybody today. The report you've got in front of you covers 3 main areas: funding, financial performance and risk reporting, so I'll briefly touch on each. Starting with funding, we've still not received, as of yet, the notification of our funding allocation from the department, despite extensive engagement with senior departmental officials by TfN officers, including the Chief Executive. In addition, as noted in the report, the full impact of the IRP on TfN's operations, in particular the ongoing requirements from DfT in relation to co-sponsorship that we've just been talking about, but also analytical support as well, or the associated level of additional funding are also yet to be agreed. We're therefore not as yet in a position to understand the extent of the activity that we're expected to deliver from core funding as a result of the IRP. As noted previously in board papers, we've undertaken a prioritisation process to support business planning. However, continued delays to the funding announcements and the ongoing questions I've just referred to in relation to NPR support activity mean that our ability to actually further develop a robust business plan is compromised, and therefore our ability to develop a budget in line with the requirement to have a fully funded budget agreed by 30th of March also risks being compromised. This is clearly having an impact on the organisation that's set out between 3.9 and 3.12. This really drives an imperative to resolve these uncertainties as quickly as possible to enable TfN to meet its obligation to set that fully funded budget before the end of this year. Now, it was our expectation that at this point, when we published the report, it was the expectation that by this meeting we would have understood what our funding was going to be. Our next steps in relation to the board in terms of funding and business planning will depend on the arrival and the timing of the arrival of our funding allocation. On the assumption that it's received in the next few days, we intend to convene a member meeting just to brief members on what is in that funding letter and to discuss with them the planning approach that we'll take. That will allow work to be done prior to the 23rd of February board call, which should therefore put us in a better position in relation to the 30th of March board when we need to set the budget. Per 316 in the report, there may also be a need, as there was last year, to constitute a member working group just to provide a sounding board for the officers in terms of developing that budget.
as I'm sure people will understand, the whole thing's going to have to be done at an incredible pace in order to get us over the line. Just finishing up on funding, we have previously noted, but I think it's worth noting again, that depending on the timing and the substance of that allocation, it may be necessary to set an interim budget, because it may just not be possible, depending on what is in that funding allocation, depending on what comes out of the discussions on ongoing NPR responsibilities, to actually get the budgets fully set before the end of the year. Moving on to financial performance, the report sets out the year-to-date position. I think we are broadly in line with both the Revision 2 reforecast and actually in line with the budgets on the core side. Whilst there have been some movements within budget lines, the overall core budget has been met pretty much, or we're expecting it to be met by the end of this year. The performance on NPR is behind. It's about £4 million down on the original budget, but I think people will understand the issues with NPR that have actually driven that shortfall. So the Revision 3 forecast is there for members to see and to be approved. Finally, we'd normally expect to present and the board to receive a risk register report at the next board meeting. It's on a 6-monthly cycle. In light of the potentially fundamental changes to some of the key risks that we are dealing with, as set out in paragraphs 6.6 and 6.7, we intend to undertake a full review of the risk register once we've got the business planning done and once we've got the IRP, once we understand TfN's response to the IRP. So the intention is that piece of work will be done by officers in collaboration with the Audit and Governance Committee, and rather than trying to bring that to the board on the 30th of March when there's, we won't then have set the business plan, it'll be brought to the following board. So it's just a piece of housekeeping really, just to let people know what we're planning on doing on the risk reporting. I'll pause there. Paul and I are happy to take any questions, but I think Martin had some words he wanted to say.
Yeah, just before I bring Martin in, I am sort of at a loss to understand why this funding hasn't come through. It might just be a line on someone's budget, but actually this is people's lives and livelihoods we're talking about, and that uncertainty at Transport for the North is really quite disturbing, and solidarity to our staff around this. So the sooner we can get this resolved, the better. And I will bring Martin in, but one of the recommendations is that we now write to the Secretary of State asking for an urgent meeting to discuss this, because we can't play around with people's lives like this. It's just not on. We have got 2 colleagues here from DFT, and I don't want to sort of put you in a position or embarrass you, but if you can add any reassurance or anything to the discussion later, that would be great. But Martin, if you'd like to make some comments, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I really kind of wanted to amplify and just build upon what Ian's been saying, because I think whilst it's been reassuring in some of the communications that we've received from DFT, that notwithstanding the changes in Northern Powerhouse Rail and the IRP, our role as a statutory body and the duties that we need to fulfil remain unchanged. The simple matter of fact is, to be able to do that, we do need to receive the core funding to allow us to do that. And it is a simple matter of fact that 2 months out from the end of this financial year, we have not got that core funding. I just wanted to reassure the board, firstly, that we've been very clear throughout the last 6 months from the start when we submitted to the spending review about the importance of the funding, the importance actually of having a 3-year funding settlement, because the department has received a 3-year funding settlement as part of the spending review, and I think it's not unreasonable to expect a 3-year settlement for TfN moving forward to give us some certainty with which to plan. But we have consistently emphasised both the timing and the importance of having this clarity. I have, over the course of those weeks and months, made sure that I've escalated it at every opportunity. I wrote to the Permanent Secretary of the Department only about 10 days ago to set out the criticality of this issue. I think you've touched on, Chair, about the importance of this actually affecting people. And I have to say that, it is inevitable in this current uncertainty that it is having an impact on our ability to deliver work. I have to say it is a truly fantastic team, but they are human. And the uncertainty is very definitely having an impact on productivity and their ability to perform, because it's for understandable reasons. I personally have an increasing concern about the impact that has on the health and well-being of my staff. I am deeply concerned about that, and I know that when I've talked to the employee forum and when we've been talking with the union representatives, that is also something very clearly on their minds. So I think the point you're making, Chair, about this is really increasingly a matter of what it means to people as much as anything else. I think I really want to echo that, and that's why my recommendation to you is that you do now, Chair, as the Chair, write to the Secretary of State saying this is something that needs to be resolved as a matter of urgency. My recommendation in writing, Chair, you say that it would be you as the interim Chair and then Patrick Mclaughlin as the new Chair, together with myself, so you have that continuity of the conversation entering into the conversation with the Secretary of State. But we really do need to have that clarity very quickly now, because it is having an impact on work, and most importantly it's having an impact on staff, and that has to be addressed.
Thank you, Martin. So I've got Mark first and then Hans.
Thank you, Chair. And I do obviously want to echo the points of Ian and Martin. And I know we all know this, but a common theme in our discussions when we were talking about the ILP and on co-sponsorship was the importance of having a strong evidence base and being able to model that value. And if we do want to have a strong voice as a co-sponsor or a future of that evidence base is there, I really just want to make the obvious point to emphasise that, you know, if we are losing the critical mass potentially of NPR and we are having the impacts on staff morale that seems to be evident in what Martin is saying, that's going to directly impact our ability to continue providing that useful function. And, you know, people and teams take a long time to build up. It's not something that we can just switch on again. And I think, you know, March feels a long time away, even from January. And if there's anything as a board that we can do between now and March, I'd really encourage all of us to try to explore ways to help support the organisation.
Thank you. And that's I think if we can all think about that, that would be really helpful. And thank you for that contribution. Hans, then Tracy.
Yes, thank you, Louise. I think possibly we're being weakened. I think with the situation at this time is looking at how can we long-term plan with short-term funding. I think it's one thing to look at, but also the morale of the staff, and actually looking at job security. The staff be looking at new jobs where they got better security than we have at present and start leaving. So I'm trying to think how to word it. It's a question of are we deliberately being forced into a situation where with the good work we've been doing all this time is going to start being diluted by people and our staff leaving to get the job security they need? Is this an accident? What's happening, or is it a deliberate ploy to make sure that the Transport for the North gets weakened with the skills it's had because we've done too good a job of demonstrating the evidence the base of the Transport for the North can have in building up the needs of the North and evidence in their case. So it's sort of suspicious that it's happening at this time, that funding that should be here isn't here, and it's short-term funding to start off with, and it's not long-term, at least the 3-year side of it, but also it's suspicious, it looks like we've been deliberately driven down. Obviously, we've been downgraded as a consultant side of things, and then our staff are not getting the wages that they should have, and the job security that's needed in the job going forward. It seems to be it's a really diabolical situation to anyone to be in, and then from anyone to say we're going to hold your funding, we're not going to release it until we decide we're going to release it, when people need to have some security behind them.
Thank you, Hans. I've got a point really well made. And I think in terms of staff, it's that knowledge, that collective knowledge that they have. And once that's gone, that's gone. You can't reinvent it, put it in someone else's head. So, Tracy.
Thanks, Nick. I just want to just add my voice to a thank you to all the staff who've worked so hard. You've acted in good faith, and this is really unfair and unacceptable. My question is, could the DFT give us any reassurance that any jobs that do pass over, that stay in the North? Because we have seen so many of those decision makers for our region don't even live in our region. So if we can make that case, at least we know we're keeping some of those jobs here across the North.
Thank you, Tracy. I know it's quite shocking to see that a third, yeah, we're in the north. Andy.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick observation. I think, you know, we all see how passionate the staff are. I mean, we're all here today because we're passionate about the North, aren't we, and what it can be in the future. But we get that feeling from the staff as well. You know, this is very much more than a job for many of them. And, you know, I think you can't divorce this situation, as Hans said, from the earlier discussion we had about the critical moment that we're in and needing to make a case for what we think is right for the North right now. Obviously, this situation will undermine our ability to do that if it's not resolved. I think we do need to be cognizant of trade union representations that say that fair processes should be put in place soon. You know, if there's not progress soon, we can't leave people in a position where, you know, they're not being given options. So I think that we do need to have an eye to that. I just going to make a suggestion, whether it's appropriate or not, I don't know, but it just feels wrong for us to be meeting at a Northern Transport Acceleration Council, which I believe is scheduled for, is it this week or next? It's coming soon anyway, isn't it? And us not to raise this issue, because I was happy to agree to NTAC on the basis that TfN would live alongside it. You know, it's not just about acceleration. If you're accelerating the wrong solutions, Transport for the North represents the ambition for the North for me, or it speaks for the ambition. And I think, you know, we, as well as seeking the urgent meeting, which I absolutely think you should do, Louise, and write as interim chair, I do think we need to make that point to the Secretary of State that we would not be comfortable, would we, with acceleration of the wrong solutions from a DFT level as we see the kind of the structure of TfN crumbling beneath us. So I think, you know, we've got to recognise that actually for the members of our staff, this is now, they can't go much, it is a while away, but they can't go much further into February, I think, without knowing where they stand. And, you know, I think it's urgent that it gets addressed straight away.
Thank you, Andy. And could you share the date of the Northern Transport Acceleration Council?
It's coming, I don't know when it...
I'm not sure it's in anyone's diaries at the moment.
Louise, it may be helpful if we are having individual conversations with the Minister, so we could raise it initially in those conversations and then wait, obviously, for the fuller meeting.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because I've got one of those individual ones. So we could do, perhaps we could circulate a note to members that they could raise just to refresh their minds.
If I might, Chair, I think the very fact that you have, if you as a board are agreed to this draft letter being sent to the Secretary of State, that in some respects is a very simple script that you've all got, which is we need to have that certainty of the funding ASAP to allow us to then begin the business planning process, that we can have the conversation with yourself, and most importantly give some certainty to the members of the team. So I think there is a simple script which is very much in that draft letter, but I think, Ian, did you want to come in on top of that? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just to really say in response to those comments on core funding and the paper that Ian's put forward. Firstly, just to say that with the excellent help and input of Ian and Paul and Martin, I can honestly say I think we have a really very clear understanding of the need for the funding situation to be resolved, of all the implications that will flow from it not being resolved soon. I think we are extremely clear on that, and I have made that all very clear to our ministers, so they are very well aware of all of that. Last Friday, our Secretary of State wrote to the interim chair to say that he would be very keen to have a meeting with the new chair once he is in post. Obviously, he's been approved, so he will be in post from tomorrow. And I fully expect at that meeting that funding will be one of the key topics for discussion. So it's really just to reassure you that we have fully heard and understood all of those implications. They are serious and significant. We have made our ministers very well aware of that, and I'm pretty sure that is something that ministers will want to address when they have that meeting. As soon as that can be arranged. And just on the Northern Transport Acceleration Council, just to clear up any confusion, it is individual calls that are happening between ministers and NTAC members over the next few days, rather than a sort of overall plenary meeting. It's a series of individual calls that are in the diary.
So there is no
There's no plan for at the moment for a full plenary board meeting. But what's happening over the next few days is a series of calls with individual members.
So we've got a date for when the next meeting will be, and I hadn't realised it was a board meeting actually. Was it?
We don't have a date for a full meeting of the Northern Transport Acceleration Council. We've just got dates for ministers to have calls with the members of the council.
Could I just ask, is that going to progress as the new normal?
The Secretary of State certainly sees the Northern Transport Acceleration Council as having a number of different ways of meeting and convening. There have been meetings that he's chaired, there have been smaller meetings that other DFT ministers have chaired on specific topics and on specific locations in the past, and I think he's also keen to keep that sort of dialogue on a one-to-one basis with members going as well. So there's a range of different ways in which he wants to take that forward. Nick, did you want to say something about jobs in the north?
Yes, sorry. I think I used to come back to Mayor Brogan's question. Obviously, to the extent that there are staff transfers involved, people have got contractual rights in that, and we will be working that through with Martin. But in overall terms, actually the department is growing its presence outside London, not least in Leeds. It's one of our kind of main hubs.
Right, so all very clear then. So I think we've got your recommendations. Does anybody want to contribute to that? Who? Oh, Councillor Smith, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going back to the point around the issue of funding, are any other boards similar to ours in the same position? Going back to the point that Councillor Mundy raised around the, shall I say, concern of why we are in the situation, just to try and, shall I say, assuage such concern, but have that on record what that current situation is, because it's from somebody who is, if you like, coming from the outside looking in, not to have a funding settlement near to April is deeply concerning. I mean, for example, County Council, we've had a year funding settlement rather than 3, but we know, by and large, by the end of January, usually as night follows day, by the 31st of January, you know how much you will have for either a year, 3, however much they've set for. The fact that we don't know, and as people have alluded to, this has got human consequences, very serious human consequences of staff having to, well, have I got a job in 2 or 3 months? That really isn't acceptable to any of us here, I'm sure, and that needs to be rectified as a matter of urgency, because the human cost could be huge. Some people could have moved their entire families for this work. You just don't know. You know, so it really isn't acceptable. Look, from the outside that's come in, it's quite alarming that's been allowed to happen in the first place.
Thank you very much for those words, and it will be, I think the support that everyone's given staff around the table will be very reassuring, but that doesn't still resolve the issue. And other transport bodies.
Yeah, thank you. So the settlement that the department received for all subnational transport bodies at the spending review last year was for all the subnational transport bodies. Obviously, Transport for the North is the only statutory subnational transport body. All of the other STBs, as we call them, work in sort of partnership mode. But the budgets for all of the subnational transport bodies are being considered at the same time at the moment. And it is actually important from our perspective that we're able to do that at the same time, because we need to make sure that all of the subnational transport bodies have the right share of that funding pot. So and certainly no other STBs have been given budgets as of yet.
Thank you. Anything else to contribute? So we've got the recommendations plus the letter, which we want to get out today. So unless anyone's got any changes to the letter, can we take that as everyone's supporting that to go out today to get those reassurances and get that meeting set up really quickly? And just to be clear, it's with the new chair, myself and Martin. So it's, you know, the 3, because I'm conscious that Martin needs to get up to speed, and it will be good eventually to meet the Secretary of State. So recommendations 2.1 to 2.4 plus an extra recommendation that we write to this. Everyone happy with that? Okay, that's great. Just show of hands to show you're all okay. Good, thank you. Next one is the rail investment planning. David.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, Board. We've just got an update for you on 3 rail investment planning items: East Coast Mainline, Blueprint, Investment Pipeline, and the whole industry strategic plan. So our role in investment planning really stems from our statutory role in providing advice to the Secretary of State. On the East Coast Mainline, first of all, you remember we made a very strong response to the proposals to change services from May 2022 that would have seen a reduction in east-west connectivity. As a result, that has been deferred, and alternatives are under development. But in many ways, there are a lot of similarities to the issue in Manchester that we've discussed in the past, that it's a lack of infrastructure investment that's constraining the number of paths, and these compromises having to be made. So on the basis of the good progress that's been made on a blueprint for Manchester that links together the investment in infrastructure with the service changes and plots that path of how services can be restored and developed in the future, we're proposing the same approach for East Coast Mainline. That's something the Rail North Committee has discussed and recommended, and it's here for the Board's endorsement. In addition to that, we're highlighting the importance of Leeds as a hub on the network, as well as Manchester, obviously providing that connectivity to Bradford, and in particular, the Board's asked to support the need to improve connectivity between Leeds and Sheffield. Obviously, this is in part related to the IRP and the gaps created there, but it's also part of this overall investment programme. The other part of the report was to be an update on the Rail Network Enhancements programme, which is the Department for Transport's method for developing and funding rail schemes. We haven't had that yet. We were expecting that on the back of the Comprehensive Spending Review and the IRP, but we're still awaiting that. We have got in the paper, though, in Appendix 1, our take on the picture of rail investment stemming from our own investment programme, and you can just hopefully see from that appendix how we've got a comprehensive coverage of investment right across the north, and not just in those major centres and hubs, but and across a range of things, including station accessibility. So we'll be using that to assess the Rail Network Enhancements programme when it is issued. And the final point is the whole industry strategic plan, which is the new 30-year strategy for the whole rail industry on the back of the rail reform agenda. There's a call for evidence that I know many of you will be responding to individually, but we're pulling together a strong North of England response. We're working with lead officers to bring in case studies and examples, and we're really banging the drum for the case for continued investment in the North and trying to bring in that strong evidence that we've got to show why that is needed. We've talked about that obviously a lot earlier on. And we've set out the approach to that. So we're still developing that with your lead officers, and we're asking that Martin, as Chief Exec, will sign off that final response, but any comments on the approach. So I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thanks for all the work that's gone into this. Colleagues, I'd open it up for any observation. Councillor Scott?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Obviously, I welcome very much the suggestion about the blueprint for the East Coast Main Line. We've already had one meeting to discuss the background to it, Councillor Gannon, myself and Mayor Driscoll. I think there was a suggestion that perhaps we should include people from North Yorkshire as well because of the difficulty around York. I mean, this is concentrating on the bottleneck at York, north of York, but I think there are problems south of York as well. So I think that is something that we suggested that we could look at. But I do hope the board will support this idea because I think it's very important that we do have a voice about the problems that we do have on the East Coast Main Line. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Robinson and then Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Obviously, kind of very good paper, David. And very pleased to see the reference under the Rail Network Enhancements pipeline about the potential of the Wrexham Bidston line, or kind of as our aspiration is very much in the North West and into North Wales, turning that into a Wrexham Liverpool service. Just wanted to kind of raise the criticality of the upgrade that would be required at Liverpool Central as a station that kind of serves our Merseyrail network, because that's one of the busiest underground stations outside of London, but is in desperate need of capacity improvements both on track and on platforms and concourse capacity. So just making sure through TfN that we are lobbying for Liverpool Central and an upgrade of Liverpool Central to be part of the RNet process and significant upgrades to our very localised network.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. And I agree about Central Station. Remembering the original Central Station, which was a very dark, dripping place, if I remember rightly, when I was a little girl. It's come on leaps and bounds, but yes, I agree. I know. Okay, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Third time I've spoken, but I will say my name this time. Peter Kennan, South Yorkshire, LEP. Just in relation to the East Coast Main Line, we did have a LEP call with the Chief Executive last week, and made the point that we must not sort of sleepwalk into some changes just because there are some services which are currently suspended due to COVID. So if they're suspended, they should still be treated as active for the purpose of examination of whether we want them to be part of the mix or not. And in particular, there is the fast service from Newcastle, York, Doncaster, Sheffield, Birmingham, Southampton is suspended. And it does form a key part of the mix, including for Darlington as well. So I'll just make that point, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. That's a really good point, because there's a number of services suspended right across the region, and we just need to make sure that doesn't become the norm as we go forward. So, yes, thoroughly support that. Hans.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think from this report, I think it's the really beneficial side of it. It's got times when things are going to happen and when we're going to see things. And I think that seems to be missing from a lot of reports we get. We get something's going to happen sometime in the future. This report actually details when things are going to happen, when it's going to be implemented, and when people are going to get the benefit from it. So I think it's a really good report showing exactly what people are going to get and when they're going to get it. And I think going forward, we'll like to see more reports like this coming forward to say what's going to happen for the people in the north, when they're going to get it, and what's it going to look like. So I really commend this report. Very, very pleased to see it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I think the most important thing, I've found this since day one, that again, Lancashire has always been a quiet voice on this board, and I don't want that to be the case anymore. I would be very grateful if you're looking for a case study of a line to reopen that will unlock growth and opportunities for everybody, then it would be the Colne to Skipton link. I think that's a great opportunity, relatively low cost, that would actually give the fourth east to west corridor and unlock a lot of the opportunity for other things, such as obviously the freight question. So I must implore that is considered as a potential case study already.
Thank you. I think you've mentioned that twice, and I get regular letters off the chap about this, so thank you. Any other comments from anybody? Okay, so recommendations are at 2.1. There's 4 of them there. Are we happy to note support, and we've commented? We all happy with those? Show of hands quick. Okay, thank you, David. So next item is the item 8, the rail business planning. David, you're staying there, aren't you? Sorry.
For this next one, Chair, yeah. We talked about the Rail North Partnership as a potential model. Our role in the Rail North Partnership gives us an insight that other local authorities don't have into the business planning process for the 2 train operators, Northern and Trans-Pennine Express. So this is work that's been overseen by the Rail North Committee, but we wanted to give the board an update on where that's getting to. I think the context here is the impact of the pandemic that's caused obviously massive increase in subsidy going into rail nationally. Just in the north, it's been over £1 billion during the period when less people were using the railways. But also the counter to that is, as we heard a couple of times already, the north is absolutely at the leading edge of the recovery, both nationally and for its sector. And although obviously there's been a reduction in demand during the latest Omicron variant issues, even during that period, the north is still ahead of the average and ahead of the sector average. So I think there's a really important point there about the potential for the north that we probably all know about anyway. So nationally, the funding position is very tight for all train operators, and the committee has sought assurances that in the north we're not being asked to take a disproportionate share, and has received some assurances on that. the committee's also challenged what seemed to be an approach to really a new baseline around the December 2021 timetable, and really made sure and really put a very strong case for making sure we are actually building growth into these business plans. So as things stand, the train operators, both our operators, have built in some growth for next year. Things like reinstating the Hull to Bridlington service that the board has discussed previously from May this year, and making sure that things like the Manchester service changes are built into the business plans that have been consulted on recently. And the committee really set a very clear direction and priority to maintain and rebuild passenger services and protect passenger-facing functions. Obviously, that does potentially have some knock-on effect on things like marketing initiatives, etc., that may have to be slightly scaled back, which may have some impact on the ability to grow the market further in the way that's been done recently. And I think it's fair to say that some very good progress being made on next year's business plans and budgets, meeting those core requirements of the Rail North Committee, but there's still a considerable gap and challenge on the following 2 years, because in this case there is a 3-year budget and settlement that's been put initially to the train operators. So the committee will carry on working with the operators, will do further briefings and further meetings. Lead officers are very, very strongly involved in just reiterating those priorities and making sure that the right priorities end up in the operator business plans, and obviously continue to make the case for the value of investment in the north and making sure that we can grow and continue to grow rather than just stagnate on the back of the COVID services. We have reduced services due to COVID at the moment, but obviously very strongly making the point they need to come back as soon as the current restrictions come out. So further reports to Rail North Committee, and really that's just there for update and comment today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Andy, then Tracy, and then Peter, then Darren.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the committee, the Rail North Committee, for their work on this. But I have to say I'm very worried about what this means, because it's what this paper doesn't say that worries me. As we know, we've been asked to accept will be asked to accept a downgraded timetable for December 22. And this is talking about further budget cuts coming on top of that. And it says that it's particularly going to hit in years 2 and 3. So April 23 onwards. And paragraph 3.29 says, it isn't clear there will be sufficient funding to continue to support all services. You know, what does that mean? What services are going to be lost here? I mean, to have any suggestion that we're going to lose rail services from a reduced timetable is, in my view, a complete non-negotiable. No way should we be even being asked to consider that. I noticed earlier in the paper, paragraph 3.11, it talks about requirements to consider workforce modernisation options. Well, we went through that before with the attempt to remove guards from the train. In my view, it just destroys public confidence in using the public transport system, particularly women and girls, and the debates I have actually about trams and the kind of sense of safety or lack of it on some of our public transport infrastructure. We shouldn't be going there again. I think guards on trains do build public confidence in using the rail system. So I just want to record that I'm very worried about what does this mean? What are we being threatened with here? And given that the North of England was promised a massively expanded timetable a number of years ago, we're now being asked to accept a reduced timetable, and this seems to be saying it could go even lower than that. It feels to me as though this is a plan for managed decline on the railways in the post-pandemic period, a car-led recovery. How is that going to work for the country in the long run? Surely we should be doing the opposite, getting people back to the office via the train. But this seems to me to be a plan to do the exact opposite. And when you consider the strong passenger numbers here and the bounce back that we've seen, and that reflects the fact that people here only have the train in a number of communities. They can't use any other public transport options, and it means they'll be basically stuck with the car. So my question is, what services, what is the scale of the threat here? And I'm just wanted to put a marker down today, Chair, that I consider this fundamentally acceptable, that we should be even looking at any further reductions to a timetable in December 22, which already this board has signalled its strong concern about.
Thank you. Andy, do you want to think about a recommendation we could add around that? And then we can come back, I'll come back to that in a minute. But I'm worried about that managed decline. And I talked before about where services are being suspended, that doesn't become the norm. I know in North Wales there's only one direct train to London now. That's with Chester as well. So it's sort of when they're coming back and there's no answer. So I think we do need, so if you can, while we're discussing, just think of a recommendation that we could put in there, that would be really helpful. Thank you. And the point about guards on the train, for me, is really important.
Yeah, just workforce modernisation options. I think we're getting sort of vague language here. What does this mean? Because I do not want to go back into that. That debate was had, it was settled, we should not be going back there.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a number of people who want to speak. Tracy, next.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more with what Andy has just said. Already we're having cuts under the smokescreen of COVID, whereas in Leeds station, we're at the weekends 110% capacity of pre-COVID. So you know, the government are making this argument that we're having to have these timetables to, you know, because of COVID. We can't have COVID, as I said, that smokescreen, because already the absence of services between Huddersfield, Wakefield and Castleford are already a cut. And I stood on a manifesto of the safety of women and girls, and the idea that efficiencies are going to take away the safety in our stations for women travelling and vulnerable people travelling is something I will not countenance. So any efficiencies must go back into the network and into the railway. Surely the whole point of this is to build growth, and not, as it feels like from this report, it is managed decline. They're giving us the bare minimum to get from A to B. It's just not acceptable.
Thank you, Tracy. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I fully endorse the paper that David's put together and the comments that have just been made by the two mayors. I just want to say that this paper looks quite Rail North Partnership centric, to do with TPE and Northern, and I wanted to make it a lot wider because I think we need to be engaging as an organisation much more closely with all the operators. Avanti for West Coast, LNER East Coast, Cross Country, and East Midlands Railway for Sheffield, and the Sheffield Manchester service, which is 50% provided by East Midlands. And a Arriva train, well, no, Transport for Wales now as well. So I just wondered if David could perhaps comment further about how we can actually get that better engagement with all those operators, because it's a key matter.
Can I bring David in to comment at the end? Did you mention Avanti? Because it's Avanti. Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, Darren.
Yeah, I concur with the comments of the colleagues, but what I do want to do is, so it sounds sort of a positive statement from Hull coming now, so just warn you, Chair. No, we, on behalf of Mclaughlin East Riding colleagues, we would like to thank the officers for the work in getting the whole Bridlington service reinstated from May, because obviously our concern is that is, as I said, that's our suburban route into Hull for all our commuters and workers. And with that off, they're more likely to get in the car, as Andy sort of hinted at. And I'm reassured that not all those services are being wound down as part on the back of the COVID. So that's really important for not just as I said, the whole folk going to the coast for the summer, but actually our commuter routes in. And what we have said, and we did say at that meeting we had with yourselves, was that because it's so important to our active travel, we would certainly step up to the mark and certainly with East Riding meet you some way regarding promotion of that service. So if they are cutting back on promotion, certainly the local authorities would be willing to commit to that, because it's something that's so important to us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Darren. So I've got Liam, Tom and Hans. Anybody else want to speak so I can put you on the list? Okay. Oh, Mark,
Yeah.
thank you. Liam?
Lovely, thanks, Louise. And I'll sort of agree with everything that's just been said, because we sort of strongly are concerned about this principle of rail funding being cut across the north of England. Yeah, as Andy said, we were promised an ambitious, growing rail network. Coming out of COVID, our kind of patronage is higher comparatively to other parts of the country. And you look at this paper as well, where it mentions about for every £1 we spend on the North Railway, it's worth £4.30. Oh God, that's a brilliant investment, isn't it? You know, kind of surely we should be focusing on all of those kind of aspects. And I think from our perspective, we really worry about reduced services. I strongly agree with Andy's point about destaffing trains. Don't want to go back to that. Equally, as Tracy said, we would strongly object to the principle of taking staff off stations, because we know from a lot of the work we've done, that's where people feel most vulnerable, naturally. So you've got to have a good quality staffing presence on the rail network. All of that said, though, there are efficiencies you can find in the rail industry. And one of the things I want to recommend, actually, now, because as people who will know me well, that when you look at some of what are termed the industry fixed costs, and actually things like the rolling stock leasing industry is extremely inefficient. You know, kind of the analogy I would use, it's like buying a house on a credit card rather than going to a bank and getting a proper mortgage. And particularly when you look at what's happened over the past almost 24 months now through the pandemic, because rolling stock leasing has been treated as an industry fixed cost through the bailouts, those companies that have made billions of pounds of dividend payments over the past decade have been making significant millions that they're paying out as dividends over the past 2 years. So one of the things genuinely I think Transport for the North needs to be doing, not just to make the case for the North, but actually would be able to pioneer some work to make the case for the whole of the UK, is actually do a bit of an investigation and a deep dive into the rolling stock leasing market, because for me, one, it's ripe for a windfall tax because of what's happened throughout COVID. But secondarily, when you move into the new world of GBR, actually properly needs to be regulated. So things like the profits and dividends that have left are capped, and we don't end up in the mad situation where old trains have been paid for, in some cases 3 or 4 times over throughout their life in lease payments. It's a nonsense at the end of the day. And if we want to go even further, feel free to come to the Liverpool City region, where we've adopted a direct procurement model for our rolling stock, and over its life it will be a third cheaper. It's the best way to get your bang for your buck from taxpayers. So can I suggest an additional recommendation? We actually asked Martin and the team to do some detailed work on that, because I think that's a great efficiency we can take back to the department and say, here's where we can find additional money to actually protect and enhance services for passengers and stop, frankly, an unjustifiable leakage of what ultimately is underwritten by the taxpayer.
Thank you, Liam. And I think, as in principle, yeah, Martin's happy to take that away. We just need to be conscious of the pressures that are currently on the team and how much they can manage. But I think that would be a good idea to come back at a later stage. So I've got Tom next.
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me. From a Lincolnshire perspective and a North East Link perspective, in terms of timetable, we were, as far as I'm concerned, even pre-COVID, we were at bare minimum for what I would call a functioning railway network. Now, with the reduced timetable, even on the main line from Barnet, which is just in North East Lincolnshire, to Doncaster and further afield, after a certain time on a weekend, the train's every 2 hours. And then from about 9 o'clock at night, you've got a 4 or 5 on a bus, which just isn't viable. So if we lose any more services, I mean, I use that train regularly for personal journeys as well as for things like this. And that soon simply won't be viable for me, and I'm sure countless other people, which, if we're trying to decarbonise and trying to get people out of the car into public transport, well, you've just scored an own goal there, because the best way to do that, it's certainly in Lincolnshire, to get further afield, is by train. Because by bus will take you too long. If you're trying to get to work for 9 o'clock, it will take you far too long. In terms of station and staff and things, areas that have them are very lucky. In Lincolnshire, we don't. Certainly in the stations I use, and one very local to me, we don't have staff in stations. Any staff at any time in stations. And they're open to the air, and there's very little to no shelter in them. So they can't take that away from us in Lincolnshire because we haven't got it. We're again a very poor relation. We're expected to contribute to the economy, and they want Lincolnshire to expand and attract other industries other than farming, etc. Well, to do that, you're going to have to invest in your infrastructure. So that means invest in your road network, invest in your railway network, invest in your digital infrastructure, not do what, as Andy said, this paper seems to want to do through what it isn't saying, which is de-invest in the railway network, use COVID as a justification when actually the East Midlands and the wider North is hideously underinvested anyway in terms of the rolling stock we have, the amount of trains we have that we're able to use. If you de-invest in the Midlands anymore, and certainly in Lincolnshire, the train network's just not viable. It's very, very close to that, even pre-COVID. If you do it anymore, it isn't going to be viable, and you're going to have huge issues because, certainly in Lincolnshire, we have no motorway. We have very limited amount of dual carriageway road network. You are going to have a major, major problem because where does all the food come from? Comes from, the majority of it comes from Lincolnshire. And you're going to have a huge problem of mass gridlock and the basically you're not going to have the productivity that you would have if you actually invested. And as Councillor Rumston said, for every £1, £4.30. I mean, crikey heck, where else can you get value for money like that? Certainly in any local government or any public sector investment, that's some of the best value for money figures I think I've ever seen. So to de-invest, it's absolutely crazy.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just conscious we need to stay quorate, so nobody else go. We'll have to lock it. It's all right, Heather, I'll let you go. I know you've got a long way to go, but we need to stay quorate. 10, I think, is the amount for elected members. Okay, thank you very much for that, Tom. So Hans and Mark, as quick as possible, please.
Yeah, be quick. I think because the point I was trying to make straggles item 8 and 9. It's about recovery and the lack of investments. Because what I need to highlight is the Warrington West Station, which is part funded by the council, has obviously had a reduction in services there, which I think we need to mention about, and it's all due to lack of infrastructure investment. I think over 10 years ago, it was identified we needed the turnbacks in Warrington there to make sure we can get Liverpool and Manchester and the frequency of them trains coming. We've actually, the council's part funded the new Warrington West Station. Now, because of the recovery there, is we have a platform full of passengers, train coming, filling that train, and it disappearing, and the platform's still got passengers on who can't get on. There's no other train, so they have to go back in the cars and get on their day's business. It's totally unacceptable, and it's all down to the turnback's not being built when we promised it was being built. And going back to my earlier point, there's no actual time limit, no time being put forward when the work's going to start for this needed infrastructure improvements. The turnbacks have helped Manchester, it helped Warrington, and it helped Liverpool. So actually, the infrastructure needs to be invested in there, but it demonstrates the thing about the return back to train passenger numbers is up in the north. We've got a platform or a new station which is being crowded by passengers who can't get on trains. Totally ridiculous.
Thank you, Hans. Mark.
Yeah, I'll be brief, Chair, thank you. This is just to link back to my earlier point, really, around key themes and messages. The growth in rail and freight back to beyond COVID capacity is one of those key messages that should preface every bit of communication that we do with Westminster and Whitehall, to actually put them on the spot to say, how on earth can you justify what you are proposing given this backdrop of economic growth and performance on passenger numbers? Thank you.
Thank you. So we've agreed we need a couple of extra recommendations here. The point that Andy raised earlier, we've got Liam's, which is about the officers doing a piece of work. Andy, have you thought about any sort of wording around?
Course, yeah, no expert in this kind of thing, but it's something I like along the lines of the board would oppose any further reduction in services and staffing from the December 22 timetable, given that is already a much reduced timetable from what we were originally promised. Yeah. And any further loss would damage trust. And it's something like that, isn't it? You know, we've had to consult on a reduced timetable. To kind of reduce it further beyond that is really going to, damage trust. So it would oppose any further reduction in services and staffing from the already reduced December 22 timetable.
Okay.
If that works.
Yeah, I think that sounds really good, and perhaps linking what Mark said. Phil, you look like you were going to come in and say something.
I was simply going to suggest that we need to make a reference back to the sort of a regional idea behind Transport for the North, would be my view. Because, I mean, in the end, it strikes me that listening to every conversation that we've had, if you were going to wind up this organisation in a slow and methodical way, this is what you'd do. And I think there's an existential crisis. I mean, this is not for now, but there's an existential crisis for this organisation as to whether it's got any purpose. So I think, picking up Andy's point, I think that we simply need to make a reference to the fact that years ago this organisation began with promises, etc. And we should not now end up in a situation where it's just managed decline.
Okay, so we'll put some words around that, which, so is that, yeah.
On the point of Anne's recommendation, I would like to add something very specific about Lincolnshire, which is that any decline from a pre-COVID timetable will mean that service is particularly non-usable in real practical terms. It's barely usable with the reductions, and I do mean barely. A train every 2 hours on the way back on the main East Coast line is not usable in a normal day-to-day period of time. So I would urge, if we can somehow, which I'll defer to Martin on, if we can put something in there around that actually we need in Lincolnshire to go back to a pre-COVID timetable as a minimum for it to be a viable option to actually comply with the government's want to decarbonise, etc., and the wider strategies around this. Otherwise, it's simply not going to work.
Okay, Martin, I think my view is we need to do it collectively, so it's about everybody this, and I take on, because I could put it as well for Chester to London, but won't.
If I might, Chair, I think I would just caution about being too specific at this point. Rail North Committee is actually taking the leadership on this and working with Rail North partners. I think the point that Mayor Byrne was making about, we're not looking for managed decline beyond a certain point, which picks up the point that Peter Kennan made earlier about there are some services at the moment which are actually suspended, but we don't want to lose. So I think that substantive point is right. I think I would be just cautious about pinning colours to a particular timetable, because we do know, for example, that some of the operators are responding quite flexibly to changes in the demand. And we've talked about how the demand for leisure services is actually 130, 140%. So my advice is don't be too prescriptive. I think the substantive point about there's a base level of service that we don't want to lose, and therefore I think that's a really good point for the board to be taking, and that's a very good steer then for the Rail North Committee when they're dealing with the detail, as they are through the rail business planning, to pick up in more detail.
Okay, so everybody, we've got the 3 recommendations, plus one from Liam and one another, the wording of which will appear, but I think we've got the general gist. So if everyone's in support of that, could you show your hands? Okay, that's clearly carried. Thank you very much. Mindful it is 4:10, so I want to gauge your views on, we're only just quorate now, so if anybody else has to go, then we're not quorate. And I was wondering, items 9 and 10, there's nothing specific in these, and we could leave it to the consultation call, but if people want to talk about union connectivity review now and the strategic transport plan development, then I'm happy for that to go ahead. So I just wanted to gauge people's views. Andy, you were waving your hand a bit there.
Well, I would, Chair, like to say something very brief about the union connectivity review. Just because the HS2 bill has arrived in Parliament and it's quite live.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. We'll carry on, but please don't leave. We'll try and get through in the next half hour these 2 items. Tim, where's he gone? Oh, there he is down there. Oh, you're sitting there now.
Just the timing then, Chair, I suggest I skip straight to the recommendations, if that's all right. I'll take the paper as read. I think lots of positives in the Union Connectivity Review when it's published at the end of November. Lots of very clear alignments to the work that TfN is doing, and indeed to our evidence base and the approach that we've taken, particularly to recognising the importance of cross-boundary connectivity. So I won't repeat any of that. As the recommendations set out, what we're seeking approval from the board today is to continue the conversation with the department, because the UCR is a review at this stage by Sir Peter Hendy. Government is in the process of considering how it responds. We think there's a role both for TfN's evidence base and for subnational transport bodies generally in creating the new strategic UK transport network. So that's one point. I think the other thing that we're saying as part of the development of TfN, the work that we need to do on the strategic transport plan over the next year, this feels like a good opportunity to strengthen both our existing relationships with Scotland and Wales. As the Chair knows, actually that cross-border relationship into North Wales is really strong already, but we think there's more we can do to support on Scotland. And indeed, TfN has never formalised relations with Northern Ireland or the Republic, and from a freight perspective, the UCR has really brought out the importance of that connectivity and that corridor. So those are the kind of the key recommendations for the board today.
Thanks, Tim. And certainly the recommendations about reaching out to Scotland, I think are really important. We've done it a lot with Wales, and it has added benefits, not just around transport, as recently seen with Chester Football Club. So I think that building of relationships is really, really important. And unfortunately, we've got no one here from the North East or Cumbria, but I was going to suggest that they're part of that reaching out, because it does have added bonuses in other areas. Andy, did you want to comment?
So thanks, Chair. Briefly, as I said, the bill has been deposited in Parliament now, the HS2 Phase 2B bill. That happened yesterday. And Greater Manchester has always been a strong supporter in principle of HS2. But we are frustrated, I think, that we still find ourselves in, having supported it all the way when many others didn't, we still find ourselves in dispute on the airport, and I've mentioned that today, I won't go through that again today, but the financial contribution. Piccadilly, I've rehearsed those arguments here. We passionately believe an underground station is the right option for Piccadilly. But the problem with the Union Connectivity Review, it undermines the bit where we were in agreement, which was on the Goulburn link, which created an opportunity for a new hub at Wigan, which would have integrated Wigan Walgate, Wigan North Western, and benefits a lot of people in that corridor between Liverpool and Manchester who would then potentially use that hub. So the bill's in Parliament, and this review throws that into doubt by saying the Goulburn link may or may not go ahead, which blights that whole thing. And it's just important for me to say that we have to oppose the proposal in the Union Connectivity Review to take it further north up the line, because there's a bill in Parliament, and we need to nail down what we can nail down in the HS2 bill, rather than it all being up in the air, which feels a bit chaotic to me.
Thank you. And Andy, is there anything you want to, or what is the ask of the board to note those concerns?
I think it's just, yes, I mean, there's a bill in Parliament that's proposing a railway line through this area, and if what is the status of that now? When is the government going to make a decision on this? Is that in or is that out? We can't have a debate with our residents about the HS2 bill if we don't know where we stand on a line that we thought we had an agreement about. I think the recommendation, Chair, is for urgent clarification on the status of the Goulburn link, so that the parliamentary debate can be conducted in clear terms, rather than this sort of cloud that now appears to be hanging over it.
Okay, so I think if we can take that away, Martin and his team to take it away and get some advice and come back quickly on it.
I think, Chair, if you as a board have an additional recommendation asking myself to come back with advice on the, and in that I will seek clarification from the department and then come back to the board.
Anybody else got anything they want to add? Charlie?
Sorry to elongate this any longer, Madam Chair. On the Goulburn link, I completely and utterly agree that we need some clarity on it. This did kind of feel like it came left of field, completely contrary to what the IRP was saying. We get the Union Connectivity Review, and we just get told that there might be something being built in Lancashire. It's not good enough. I am really glad that we're seeking clarity on Goulburn. I think it's really important. 3.20 of the report, it talks about opportunities for TfN. My computer's just gone off. It talks about the opportunities for TfN and what we can do. In the third paragraph, it says about how we can act as a broker and bring different partners together. I think that's really important, and I'm really conscious of things like, sorry to talk very parochially a second again, Heysham Port and Blackpool Airport, two massive potential players in the especially the Irish conversation, that is just not really mentioned, referenced, talked about, but the reason why I've raised that is just to say there is nothing in the recommendations of the report that reflects that aspiration of TfN. So I'm just wondering whether or not there's anything we can say that talks again about how can TfN act as a broker. I'm not bothered about how we do that, but I just think it's really important that TfN does act as a broker as it says in that report. If that's okay. Just a recommendation that reflected the report a little bit.
Yeah. Tim, do you want to pick that up?
Well, I only say we'll take it away and come back to you. But I think this links to the freight and logistics work that's currently out for consultation as well as some work that we're starting to do on international connectivity, but effectively, airports and aviation as well. So there'll be more coming back to this board, I think, on those issues. But we'll come back to you on the specifics. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments for this? Everyone supportive of the recommendations? Quick show of hands. Fantastic. Final one is strategic transport plan, in particular policy development around active travel and multimodal hubs. If nobody wants to discuss this now, we can bring it to the consultation call. I do note this week that Chris Boardman has got a new role of the interim National Active Travel Commissioner, and it would be interesting to see how he can link in with the work. He has been a friend of Transport for the North. He's worked extensively in Greater Manchester and beyond, and I just wondered if we should consider the role that Chris might have in terms of how we develop our active travel part of that. And the other one that and I'm not sure if it links into this, I've been approached by a disabled group looking at disability hate crime, and it links into the work that Tracy is doing about harassment, violence against women and girls. It goes back to guards on trains and that whole sort of inclusivity, and I'd like to think about how we could take that forward, maybe as part of this strategic transport plan. So I'll just get that out very, very quickly. And then Tom, you wanted to say something?
Very brief, Chair. On the second point you raised, being disabled, it can be intimidating if you don't feel confident enough to speak up and stand up for yourself, especially if people are a few too many and are a bit rowdy. I've never had a problem myself personally, but I know people do. In terms of the active travel side of things, it's a very brief point that when we've read everything else in the agenda, it seems a slight contradiction in terms that they want active travel and modal travel to take place, yet when you've read everything we've gone through, it seems to actually, certainly in the north of England, making it harder. I won't, as Charlie said, I won't elongate the conversation any longer, so if you would prefer to defer, that's fine, but I just thought it was important that we as a board make that point that, okay, you want this to happen, why are you making it hard for people to do it in reality?
Thank you. Point very well made, and perhaps a good way to draw the meeting to a close. Is everyone happy that we discuss this at a later stage? Okay, in that case, we will defer this item. Thanks once again to all the team for all the work that you're doing. We are behind you and we are supporting you in terms of that. The next meeting is a consultation call, a virtual one, 23rd of February, and the next in-person meeting, 30th of March, at a destination to be confirmed. I'm not sure where, but that's that. Thank you. So thank you very much. Lovely to see you all, and have a safe journey